The old adage goes that you get better at football by playing football. You can't teach experience. After all, the 2023 national champion Michigan Wolverines were the team that had the fifth most returning experience in the country. Doesn't necessarily hold correlation, does not necessarily equal causation, but it certainly gives you a leg up. We're going to look at the whole of the Big Ten, and we can also talk a little bit more directly about Michigan's future opponents. Overall, offense, defense, all of that on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. And somehow I missed that Bill Connolly until yesterday while we were doing our episode, literally an episode. I had somehow missed that Bill Connolly from ESPN had put together his returning production rankings last week, which is kind of weird that I missed it because normally he puts them out in February. And here we are in March. He puts them out in early February, rather. And with that in mind, I ranked all the Big Ten teams, or he ranked all the Big Ten teams, as well as offense, defense. But I have some thoughts on all of these things. So not to get very listy, but we're gonna go through the list. I'm gonna talk about each of them. We'll highlight Michigan's opponents in 2025, and we'll try to hopefully get a better idea of who is likely to be really good and who maybe won't be. So let's start with the overall rankings in segment one. We'll do offense and then defense and kind of wrap up in segment three. But let's start off with the most experienced team in the Big Ten is Illinois. They come at number 3 in the rankings here. That does put them up above kind of where they were. Whoops. Oh man, I completely ruined my, whenever you scroll, I can't see where I'm at time-wise. Dang it. Did not mean to scroll. But I wanted to look at the Big Ten rankings from last year. And I'm just not doing a very good job of using a computer. That's apparently new to me. All right. So regardless, I have them as a plus. They were not necessarily like this crazy amazing team, but they were 6-3 in the Big Ten, 10-3 overall. So with that type of returning experience, the fact that you've got Luke Altmaier returning, I think that bodes extremely well for Illinois. I didn't look at their schedules, at everyone's schedules, but Michigan thankfully avoids Illinois, who I think can at least be maybe an 11-2 type of team, depending on who they play this upcoming season. Again, I could look at it, and I'm not going to because there's just too many teams to get through. Rutgers comes in as the second team, and they are the 7th most experienced team in the country. They were about the same thing going into last year, but Rutgers kind of being what it is, I put that as an equal, right? But they finished 4-5 in the Big Ten, 7-6 overall. I think that's probably going to hold, right? Like, it's still Rutgers. It's a really good Rutgers team is kind of destined to go somewhere between 7-6 or maybe 8-5 type of thing. Could Rutgers go 8-5 like Michigan did last year? It's possible. Wisconsin, who Michigan faces. This is the first team that Michigan faces, is the third place Big Ten team at number 25 overall. Did not have a good season last year, went 5-7, missed any postseason activity. I do have them as a plus, but again, new quarterback, Luke Fickell still hasn't kind of gotten his stride yet. It is a more experienced team. They're pretty even in terms of who they're bringing back on offense and defense, which does help a bit. But again, Billy Edwards, new quarterback, they kind of feel to me like a 7-6, 8-5 type of team next year. So I don't really have them going like super high here. I will next go to Michigan, who's the fourth most experienced team in the Big Ten. Michigan finished the season as the 7th ranked Big Ten team at 5-4 in the conference, 8-5 overall. Certainly, I think that Michigan is going to greatly exceed where they were last year. Offense should be a lot better. We'll get to the defense. There's a lot that's going to work out really well for Michigan in terms of that. So actually, let me see if I can do this. Let me see if I can do what I wanted to do. Will this work? Aha, it will. There we go. Now we figured out how to utilize some things computer-wise. Okay. Up next is MSU, is the 30th ranked. I think that they will be a bit better, but again, they were a 5-7 team last year, 3-6 in the conference. Them being better feels like getting to a bowl game. I'm not really sure, not to skip ahead, offense returning a lot more than the defense, but the defense was a strength last year, so that kind of poses some additional issues that maybe you wouldn't have had otherwise. So that's where MSU kind of has some issues there. I got to speed along because this is taking way longer than I thought. Penn State is next. Everyone talks about Penn State like, oh, they're bringing everyone back. They're actually bringing back less talent than they did last year. They were 23rd in the country in returning production. They do bring back a ton on offense. Drew Aller, both of those running backs. There's a lot going on there. So I think that will help them at least be competitive, but they lose so much on defense that I'm not really sure what to expect of Penn State. So there's that. Minnesota is next. They're the 40th team in the country. They last year, let's see, where Minnesota surprised a bit. They were just behind Michigan at 5-4 in the conference, 8-5, behind Michigan by virtue of losing to Michigan. That's another team that I think they can really take a step forward. They need to work out some offensive things, but nonetheless. Indiana comes next, 44th in the country. We've already seen Kirk Cignetti in year one. They're not going to be sneaking up on anybody in year two. That's for sure. Going to need a new quarterback. That's a problem. But nonetheless, okay, I'm going to scrap kind of the way that we're going here because it's just taking every team and talking about where they're at. As much as I thought I was going to be able to race through this and then give thoughts, I'm not going to be able to do that. So I'm going to highlight a couple teams that I really think is interesting. So the 14th best team in the Big Ten is USC, who did not do that great. They were 7-6 last year, 4-5 in the conference, 97th in returning production. Not great in terms of either offense or defensive returning. So that is not great for Lincoln Riley's team. He has not seemed to figure it out. Certainly hope that some transfer portal stuff and the new quarterback is going to work out. But to me, the big thing is to note 15 and 16 are Ohio State and Oregon, 101st and 109th respectively. Lose a ton both sides of the ball, both of them. Oregon is the defending Big Ten champion. Ohio State is the defending national champion, who went 14-2 this past year. Oregon went 13-1. And I have a hard time seeing, like, as for all the SP plus having Ohio State as the number one team in the country and all of that, when you lose that much, because, okay, Ohio State is 101st. Michigan was like 100 and, like, I think like 130th or something like that. So, I mean, you can still have a winning record, but there's a reason why things didn't really work out for the Wolverines last year. And in large part, it was just the inexperience. Ohio State and Oregon breaking in new starting quarterbacks. At least Oregon has a guy who has started games at quarterback in Dante Moore, but Ohio State doesn't have that. They're going to say, okay, we've got the talent. We got J.J. Smith, got a couple guys in the defensive backfield that are returning, and that might bode well, but at the same time, that is a lot. Plus, they lose both coordinators. To me, that just feels like an uphill battle for the Buckeyes that I just don't think enough people are talking about. Now, can they overcome it? Well, they are talented. Absolutely. But if you get better at football by playing football, that is going to put you a little bit behind the eight ball. And to me, I think that it would not surprise me if Ohio State took a little bit of a step back, right? They've got Texas early. So, I mean, that ends up posing some issues. Now you can overcome that. But again, I wouldn't predict them to beat Michigan at this point, especially because Michigan's retooling. All right, so let's get into the offensive rankings. We'll kind of more deal with the teams that Michigan faces and maybe a couple others, so that this isn't just reading a list. Again, my apologies. That I had a plan, it didn't work. We're shifting gears. That's what we're gonna do that. All right, we're gonna do that here in just a moment. But before we do, get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk with a real person. And for the trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage, and now it's your turn. So join the Trademaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use the promo code SH5 for 5% off your order. That's supplyhouse.com. This is kind of a Murphy's Law type of show because I can't see my time, how long we're taking. Windows are all askew, can't fix them on the fly. All right, so let's talk more about the teams Michigan sees offensively. I've got their offensive rankings, where they rank in the Big Ten, where they rank overall, and where they actually finished in terms of ranking of total offense last year. Because I think that's important to note, because it kind of gives you an idea of like how much are they going to improve upon what they were last year. So the first opponent that Michigan faces is Michigan State, who is the should be the, I don't know why the numbers are wrong. Should be the fourth team in the conference. Let me see if I can fix this. There we go. The numbers were all whack. They're 17th overall in returning offensive production, and they do have a returning quarterback in Aiden Childs. I'm not really sure about the rest of their guys. I don't follow as much in the offseason what other teams still have or don't have. I think you get a little bit of an idea in spring ball, but I don't know if like Montori Foster or any of their other people, like that's the only one I can really name at the moment. Nate Carter, are those any of those guys returning? I'm not sure. Now, MSU was the 110th ranked offense last year. I'd venture part of that is playing some really tough defenses. Part of that is the copious amounts of turnovers, not finishing drives and things of that nature. But we've seen that Aiden Childs can be an electric quarterback if he can just not turn the ball over a lot. So that should be more of a strength for Michigan State. So I'm curious to see there. The next ranked one, the fifth ranked Big Ten offense in terms of returning production is Nebraska, who's 30th in the country in returning production, 94th last year in total offense. Another one that's going to scream up the rankings. Like both of these teams, I think are at least going to be middling offenses, right? Like if you're returning a ton and you're down in like the 100s, you can basically say it's probably not going to be like the best offense in the country, but it's certainly you want to see a big modicum of a jump of improvement. Now, Nebraska, what it has in its favor is a top flight quarterback in Dylan Raiola, the former number 1 overall recruit in the 2024 recruiting class, getting his freshman year out of the way as the starter. That's going to help. And just by virtue of having so many returning pieces, and certainly Nebraska's done a good job with some things in the transfer portal and getting some linemen and things of that nature. I think that they could go actually from 94th in the country to being a top 50 unit, which is not what Michigan's going to want to hear, but that's, I think, their trajectory. Up next is Wisconsin, who does have a new quarterback, albeit with starting experience in Billy Edwards, who was at Maryland. They're 34th. In the country in returning offensive production. They were the 99th offense last year. I don't think that they'll have as glaring of an uptick as Nebraska will, but I do think that they will have a pretty big uptick regardless. I would look at that to go more so from 99 to let's say like 50, not 50, like 60. I think that that's possible. Maybe Michigan does play them again. They're going to have to play the Michigan defense too. That's not going to help. I don't think. We'll talk about that. Michigan is 8th in the Big Ten in terms of returning offensive personnel. They were the 47th returning offensive production ranked team. I don't know why English fails me today, but it does. Michigan was ranked second to last in the Big Ten overall in terms of overall offensive ranking. Only one place ahead of Northwestern. At 129th in the country, the 5th worst offense in the country Michigan had, or I guess the 6th. Given Bryce Underwood, Chip Lindsey, I expect that number to be closer to 60. I would not be surprised if it was 40 or 50. Now, the way Michigan plays football, maybe it doesn't need to be that, right? Like if it can lean on its defense, then maybe it ends up being like 70 or 80. Still, I expect a big jump in terms of that. Northwestern is 10th in the Big Ten, 76th in returning production, and had 130th in the country. Problem is Northwestern returned almost everybody last year on offense and was terrible last year on offense. I do not expect any modicum of improvement, right? Like, maybe they got better players. I'm not seeing it. I don't think so. USC is 13th in the conference, 85th in terms of returning offensive production, had the 23rd offense last year. Now, they have an offensive mastermind as the head coach who also calls the plays. Going to have a new starting quarterback who's gotten a couple starts under his belt late last year. Lost some talent to the transfer portal, gained some talent in the transfer portal. For me, I don't think they'll be 23rd. I could see USC falling to like 40th or 50th. I still think the offense will be functional, but also playing in the Big Ten against tough defenses is not going to bode well for Lincoln Riley. Maryland is 14th in the country, 89th returning offensive production. They had the 67th best offense, so really kind of truly a middling offense last year. I don't see it. Not returning a lot of guys, don't have their starting quarterback, losing some massive talent to the NFL in Ty Felton. I just think it's a massive issue for Maryland. Maryland, to me, is going to take a big step back. Washington is next, 15th in the conference, 91st in terms of returning offensive production, had the 61st ranked offense last year. Jed Fish, again, offensive head coach. However, losing some of the talent that they've got, I think that's just not going to go well. They're, again, really good in the transfer portal. If they were able to hang on to Jonte Cook, I think maybe it could have been a little bit better. I think it's going to take a little bit of a step back. And then next year, I think, is the year that you start to see them doing some things. Ohio State is 16th in the conference, 92nd in terms of returning offensive production. We're down scraping the barrel here. 28th best offense last year. Listen, it's going to be a new quarterback, a new offensive coordinator. Ryan Day calling the plays probably again, but like it was in 2023 when Brian Hartline was the offensive coordinator the last time. I don't know, right? Like they've got a ton of talent. They got Carnell Tate. They brought in Max Clare. New offensive line coach, new running backs. I mean, it's just a lot to try to get into place. It's a lot of talent, certainly, but we've seen what a lot of talent with needing to break in a new quarterback and some, a new offensive coordinator, kind of how some of those things can kind of tend to work. It would not surprise me in the least if Ohio State kind of fell down to earth a little bit. Now, super talented quarterback, if it's Julian Sand, but has not played really any meaningful time whatsoever, so that does not bode well for the Buckeyes either. Last is Purdue, 130th in returning offensive production, loses pretty much everybody. 120, I have that wrong. They weren't the 127th offense last year. I don't know where that number came from. 27th, I think it was. I think I hit a 1. Quarterback who started at UCLA, Dante Moore. Whoops, nope, sorry, I had that wrong. I was looking at Oregon. Purdue, absolutely. 130th, 127th. Offensive head coach, lots of moving parts. Who knows what that's going to be? I'm not going to talk a heck of a lot about Purdue. That just feels mean and wrong. All right, let's get to the defense. Let me see if I can do a little bit better of a job of being a little more succinct. We will do the defense here in just a moment. If the offense felt like it was mostly good news, Michigan's playing more of the middling offenses in the Big Ten this next year. Defense, it's maybe not, because everyone in the Big Ten for the most part is pretty good at playing defense. The worst defense in the entire conference by ranking was Purdue. Last year, 124th in the country. Maryland was 79th. Rutgers was 95th. I know I'm out of order. USC was 77th. Everyone else was in the top half of defensive rankings in the country. Well, except for Illinois, who Michigan couldn't score on, who was 68th last year. But otherwise, everybody, pretty good defenses. Multiple top 10 defenses last year, multiple teams. You look, Ohio State was number 1. Indiana was number 2. Minnesota was number 5. Michigan's number 10. Penn State's number 7. There's just a lot. And if you go into the top 20, it's even more. Michigan avoids a lot of the returning defensive production teams to some degree. So that's somewhat good news. Northwestern is the best returning production defense that they'll face. They were 56th in the country last year. Michigan wiped the floor with them. They would have had a much higher defense if they didn't play Michigan. So that's fine. Michigan plays Wisconsin, who's got 39th in production, 41st best defense. I think that number's gonna hold. MSU is going to take a little bit of a step down, I think. Number 8 defense in terms of returning production. They were the 34th best defense last year. They're 64th in returners. Washington is a step behind them at 65. They had the 28th defense last year. Maryland was 71, is 71 this year, 79th in terms of total defense. Nebraska, I think, is going to take a big step back because they've got the 74th most returning production. They were 18th last year. Ohio State, the number 1 defense in the country, is 103rd in the country. USC is 108th. They were 77th in the country. And Purdue is 118th in the country. They were 124 in terms of overall defense last year. So what that means, just to try to distill this as quickly as possible, is to not just sit there and go through and read, rankings, lists, all that kind of stuff. What that means when you look at this is a lot of these teams are going to be kind of falling back to some degree, because you look at like Ohio State, they've got a new defensive coordinator, no more Jim Knowles. Does that fall back to kind of what it was before? Especially Matt Patricia that's just such an atrocious hire, I think, in pretty much anybody's eyes. Lose all of that talent. Now, the good news about losing all that talent is he can mold it into whatever he wants it to be. I just don't know that it's going to be anything kind of worthwhile. But looking at Ohio State with one of the worst numbers in terms of returning production defensively, that should tell you that, okay, if Michigan can figure out its offense, or not, right? Because Ohio State had the number 1 defense in the country last year, and Michigan still beat them with an anemic offense. That's going to probably pose some issues for them. When I look at these numbers and I see some things here, I'm feel a little bit better about Nebraska in terms of, okay, they had a really good defense last year, but they're probably going to take a little bit of a step back. You look at MSU, had a really good defense last year, is probably going to take a little bit of a step back. Same thing with Washington. That all bodes well. You'd rather see a Northwestern kind of ranked higher up in this list than seeing an Ohio State ranked higher up on the list. So I think that bodes very well. You look at USC, second year Danton Lynn, but they're 108th in terms of returning production. So that does not bode well for them. Purdue's just going to have to figure something out, man, because they were a bad team and lose everybody. That's a bad situation for them. I think that they'll, surprise some people. We've talked about that. Barry Odom's got a system. It might not be this year. But I could see some other teams, and UCLA was the bottom feeder of the Big Ten last year, and they're down at the bottom in terms of defensive returners. So completely kind of restarting as far as that goes. But for Michigan, at least, you look at number 3rd in terms of returning production defensively, 28th in the country, had the number 10 defense last year. That's a big reason why I think that defense, especially because you've seen what that defense looks like without Kenneth and Mason and Josiah against Alabama, and you're like, okay, no, they're ready to roll. Returning coaches all the way across the board. Great situation for the Wolverines. So when you look at this, you can kind of get an idea of okay, MSU, they're going to have to be a better offensive team than defensive. Can they do that? Absolutely. But they still got a lot of ground to cover. Return so many people, but at the same time, offensively, that is, the offense wasn't that good last year. Michigan's kind of middling offensively, but it needed the turnover. So that's kind of where you look at some things. It's you have players you can build around. MSU's one of those ones that does. Michigan's one that it didn't really. So you had to change some things up. So you have that. Then you look at other teams like we've talked about Ohio State. It's just either side of the ball is just a total lack of experience. Now, it can work to your benefit, but it tends not to. Would I bet on Ohio State winning the national championship and being the number 1 team in the country at the end of next year? No, I wouldn't. Because at least when you look at Georgia going back to back, they had Stetson Bennett returning, right? They might have lost a lot of the defensive players, but they had that starting quarterback who was able to do it, who was a special player, right? You look at a lot of the Alabama teams, you saw some consistency there, and at least consistency. If it wasn't at quarterback, it was other places. So when I look at Ohio State, I say that's a team that absolutely, now a step back for Ohio State is not the same as a step back for a Michigan at this point, as we saw this last year, or a Wisconsin or something else like that. I look at a team like Wisconsin, I say they're kind of the same as they were in some ways, right? Because they return a lot, but was what they were doing, was it really good? It wasn't. but they were better defensively, right? 39th in terms of returning production defensively, 41st ranked defense in the country. So you think, okay, the defense is probably going to be a little bit better, but offensively they were 99th. So like they're just going to have to get better offensively, and I think that they will. But you need a new quarterback, and some of those things kind of change the calculus a little bit. So I just think it's an interesting snapshot where you can kind of look and see like who's probably going to be pretty good. And usually, like, again, going back to 2023, Michigan had the 5th most returning talent. No surprise they won the national championship. No surprise they kind of steamrolled everybody because they were already a college football playoff team the year before. But then Michigan enters this last year 130th in terms of returning production and doesn't completely fall off the map, but can't contend with the big dogs until you get to the Ohio State and Alabama games. That also tells you that you get better at football by playing football, and Michigan last year got better at football by playing football. So that's the good news as far as that's concerned. Maybe bad news in terms of Ohio State, because Ohio State can be better by the end of the year. But what this does is it makes me, as far as Michigan's future opponents in the Big Ten, makes me a little more leery about Wisconsin, makes me leery about the Nebraska offense and less about the Nebraska defense. I feel like Maryland's going to fall off a cliff to some degree, especially because offensively, their bread and butter, not very good. Got a new defensive coordinator and are middling defensively. But it also makes me look outside of that and say Penn State, I don't think that's quite as good as people think it might be because they actually lose more than they had from last year. If they couldn't do it last year, they might not be doing it this year. But can't teach experience. They've gone through, went to the playoff finally and lose. Maybe they do get good enough to be able to do it. Penn State feels like a team that could do a lot, but I have my eyes more open on Illinois, who I think absolutely should be a team to look at because they were pretty good last year. Michigan still should have beaten them, but they didn't. And they were returning a ton of experience both sides of the ball, including their quarterback, don't have a ton of attrition. That's what this tells me. Illinois is a team to watch this next year. All right, that's going to do it for us today. We'll be back on Wednesday. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. Peace.